Today's talk will be on the subject an insight into the world of financial secrecy and tax havens. ಇದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಸನ್ಮಾನ್ಯ ಶ್ರೀ ಬಿ ವಿ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಮಾತಾಡೋರಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಬಿ ವಿ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅವರು he joined the Indian Revenue Service in 1958 and held various coveted posts in his 35 years of service. He was the Director General Revenue Intelligence, Director General Narcotics Control Bureau, and Director General Economic Intelligence Bureau. In his tenure, he was responsible for busting many syndicates operating transnationally, smuggling contraband, drugs, and organized economic crime. He was responsible for detaining and prosecuting some of the top smugglers and tax evaders. The Illustrated Weekly of India, in a front cover, called him the Super Sleuth. He also held the post of member, Central Board of Excise and Customs, represented India on various occasions such as international conference held in Vienna, drafting the UN Convention against illicit traffic in narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances, various Interpol meetings held between 1985 and 1988, and led the Indian delegation for SAARC Technical Committee on Drugs. Besides, he was elected President of the Drugs Committee during the Interpol conference held in 1987 at Nice. He has authored a number of books, The Preventive Detention Laws of India, and co-authored The Narcotics, Drugs, and Psychotropic Substances Laws of India, both published by Konark Publishers Private Limited. He has also published recently a book called The Dark Side of Black Money. It was also published by the same Konark Publishers. He has published a number of papers also on law, taxation, terrorism, and organized crime. He is also a visiting lecturer at institutions including IIM Ahmedabad, National Defense College, New Delhi, the National Police Academy, Hyderabad. We are lucky to have such an eminent personality today to address us on this subject. I request you to please.
ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೆ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ವಿತ್ ಯುವರ್ ಪರ್ಮಿಷನ್ ಐ ವಿಲ್ ಸ್ಪೀಕ್ ಇನ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್. ಅದೊಂದು ಅಭ್ಯಾಸ ಆಗಿಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡೋದು. ಸೊ ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ನಮಗೆ ಪರ್ಮಿಷನ್ ಕೊಡಿ. ಅಟ್ ದಿ ಔಟ್ಸೆಟ್ ಐ ಮಸ್ಟ್ ಫೈಲ್ ಎ ಕೇವಿಯಟ್ ಲೈಕ್ ಅ ಲಾಯರ್ that what I say should not be taken more as examples which I came across during the course of my career, where a number of criminals were involved, businessmen were involved, politicians were involved, and also based upon empirical observations of various incidents that have happened and that we are observing almost every day. The subject that is being given to me was in fact the subject on which I recently wrote a book on the darker side of the black money. And there I have dealt with this subject, and I had to do it in a rush manner because that was the hottest subject which was being discussed in the political circles, in Parliament, in the Supreme Court, and even probably yesterday or before or day before also there was a sort of a disagreement between the bench, the honorable judges of the Supreme Court, whether the matter should be left to the government to investigate or whether it should be monitored by the Supreme Court. A final decision has not been taken. The matter has been placed before the Honorable Chief Justice of India, and probably in the short period some decision would be taken. The Finance Ministry has also appointed a committee to go into the extent of black money that's available in the country and other things. So probably it's not an easy task. It will take quite some time. And in the course of my brief speech, I'll try to mention about the previous studies that have been undertaken within the country And some of the studies which have been released by an American think tank, where they've estimated the amount of money which has sort of gone out of the country and by whom and other things. They made an estimate from 1948 to almost 2008. And then there was the disclosures which were given by Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, who is probably doing a great job. I mean, we need not take that whatever he says is gospel truth, but certainly whatever percentage of discount we may give to those disclosures, still, unless there is some smoke, there can't be fire. You see. So there must be certain amount of truth in the disclosures. So all these things rather spurred me on to venture into this book, because I've been speaking on this subject in various fora in the National Defence College, while addressing a gathering myself, Professor Raja Chalaya, who was heading the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, Mr. Neenan and others, and in various other fora, where this was one of the subjects on which we've been speaking. Now today I've been requested to speak only one aspect of this, but there will be some amount of overlapping, for which I request your indulgence if some deviation takes place. The subject that has been given is an insight into the world of financial secrecy and tax havens. The subject itself implies that there is a demand for financial secrecy. And why should there be demand for financial secrecy? I can understand bank secrecy, because we all deposit our savings in the banks and we don't want our neighbors or our rivals or somebody to know how much of savings we have in our deposits, for obvious reasons, because it unnecessarily leads to jealousies, and then within the family, outside the family, close relations, rivals in business, and so on and so forth. So certain amount of financial secrecy is already granted to almost every one of us by the banks concerned, subject to the condition if an investigating agency wants that type of information under a legal process, that's issue of summons and other things, that type of information can be disclosed. So that is one part of it, which is of a limited significance, and we won't be worried rather too much. If somebody wants to know my accounts, I readily give it. Even otherwise, I give every year to the income tax department. At the end of each year, every one of us, we file a return, and our full asset and liability statement is given. Our income is disclosed, and based upon which we do our own assessment. And if there's some plus and minus, either they'll give a refund or he'll give a demand, and that's the end of it. So it's not a thing which people like us, it matters. But there are some people in the country who really demand financial secrecy for very obvious reasons. And why they want it? That is the question that we are asking ourselves. Why there is a demand for financial secrecy? If there is a demand for financial secrecy, like all demand and supply analysis, there is also a supply of secret money. Unless there is a supply of secret money, you cannot get the money if for whatever purpose we want, that there should be some amount of secret money available to me for being spent for whatever purpose it is. Now, I found from my studies that the demand for financial secrecy and consequently demand for secret money arises from the following people. For example, political leaders who feel insecure totally. So they want to save for a rainy day. They have made enough money, so they want to keep somewhere else. Then dictators, either military dictators or even other civilian dictators, like we have seen recently which happened in Egypt. They all try to make money at the cost of the country, at the cost of the people and other things. Then they stash their money abroad, and mostly in tax havens and not elsewhere and other things. For example, the Shah of Iran, he kept all his money in Switzerland, and very unfortunately he was suffering from cancer and he had to die, and he went for treatment all over. He went to US, he went to UK, finally he came to Egypt for treatment and ultimately died. And he, I think, gave clemency or otherwise to Mr. Khomeini, who was as a refugee staying in France, he came back and he took over Iran, and then entire politics of Iran changed. And that money is gone for good, except whatever little amount was saved by his sister, who was a partner in business with the Hinduja brothers. And Hindus just knew that this was coming, and they quietly migrated to UK. They shifted their assets to UK. So that's how things happen. So similarly, the present deposed president of Egypt, Mr. Yes, and he is now at least feigning sickness. I don't know whether he is really sick or his sons. They've all kept their money and other things. At one time when Gamal Abdel Nasser, he was bringing enormous amount of pressure after the revolution, and he wanted the Swiss banks and Swiss government particularly to disclose the list of all the names of the Egyptians who kept their money in Swiss banks, and in particular King Farouk, who was deposed by Gamal Abdel Nasser, and the first president who was temporarily the real president, but Gamal Abdel Nasser took over the thing. Then the Swiss government said, under our laws we cannot disclose all these things. So then he said, in that case then our diplomatic relations will be completely cancelled. So at that event the Swiss government came to a huddle, and then finally they decided, and then wrote to the Egyptian government saying that we'll disclose the list of all Egyptians who held the secret accounts in Switzerland. Then Mr. Nasser said, no, don't disclose. He himself had an account there. That's what happens in the case of military dictators. And same thing happened when King Idris of Libya was deposed. He not only kept money in Swiss banks, but he organized an insurgent force and recruited various types of adventurers and soldiers and others who have retired, and launched a secret operation called the Hilton, because they made an amphibious landing opposite the Hilton Hotel in Tripoli, and they were about to take over Libya. And due to some reasons, the Americans disclosed to Gaddafi that, look, King Idris has planned this operation and you will be thrown out. And so he took the precautions, and he was able to completely foil the attempt of King Idris's adventure, and then he was secure. And in return, the Americans extracted from him a pound of flesh, that when the 1973, when there was an oil embargo, which the Arabs instituted, consequent to the Israeli attack on the Gaza Strip and other things, then they stopped export to all the Western countries. But Libya was the only country which supplied oil to the West, and particularly to the US. So that was the quid pro quo that was involved for saving Libya. And today the same Americans are throwing out Gaddafi. Then various types of tyrants. For example, we are seeing in Oman what is happening and others, where the king is fighting with other things. Egypt we have seen, and so many other in Syria it is happening. King Assad was there for so many years. Now his son is in charge, and he is refusing to bring about democracy there. So this type of tyrants, whether they are military or otherwise, are forcing the people to almost live under subjugation without the basic freedoms and other things. And these people, they know that one stage they may be thrown out due to either internal upsurge or due to outside intervention and other things. So for a rainy day, they keep their money outside the country. Then various criminal syndicates, organized crime in particular, they do not trust when their organization will be busted. Most of them operate transnationally. Almost in every country they have sort of branches and heads of operations for each country. They exactly function like a multinational corporation, and they keep their funds generated in organized crime in tax havens. And they demand the type of money that is required to be kept in tax havens. Then drug trafficking syndicates. Enormous amount of money is generated in drug trafficking, and they make it available to people who want the funds and other things. Just to give an example, the 30,000 rupees was the price at one point of time. Now it may be double the price or a little more for 1 kg of heroin of 60% purity. Now it could be about 1 lakh of rupees. The moment it gets smuggled through the Pakistan border through the Rajasthan sector, it becomes almost twice or thrice the amount when it reaches Bombay. That is at 60% purity. The moment it reaches the New York underground market, then it is reduced to 5% purity by adding inert substances. That means to almost neutral substances, which brings down the level of the strength of heroin to 5%. And at the street level, it's being sold per kg at $2 million. So the escalation in price is so much, you can imagine the amount of money that is generated and other things, and they have to keep this type of money in tax havens, and that's a great source of supply for anybody who wants money and other things. Then multinational corporations and business establishment, they want black money to be at their disposal and which are kept in tax havens, because for getting business, they have to bribe the prime ministers, the presidents of other countries and other things to get contracts. It is well recorded that Boeing company paid to the Japanese prime minister for placing orders for Boeing aircraft and other things, and this was admitted publicly by the Japanese prime minister of that time. And their system is they kneel in a public place, apologize to the people that I committed this crime, and then he is thrown out of the prime minister's job. I don't think here, even if you ask people, the politicians, to leave the job, they will not leave. That's the comparison and other things. So these transnationals, they demand that type of money for being kept, for getting their business contracts and other things fulfilled. Then tax avoidance, which is a common form of evasion. Then there are businessmen who become bankrupt. Bankrupt in terms of the corporation which they hold, the public limited company and other things. The public limited company may be bankrupt, but not himself. He enriches himself at the cost of the public limited company. That means the investors, and particularly the small investors, who have no remedy in our country, unless they go to the court, which they can't afford. And so what he ultimately, when the public limited company becomes bankrupt, the businessman runs away. If it is a Rajasthani, he goes to Rajasthan to some village and we can't trace him. If he is a established businessman, he leaves the country and quietly goes to UK or some other country and lives there. Then smuggling and related activities, this also generates an enormous amount of money. And in smuggling, what happens is, to bring the goods into the country, if a smuggler places order, say for example for gold or any other contraband, he doesn't pay for it, but somebody has to pay for the gold in that country, and then only the gold can be smuggled. And then when it is sold, it becomes the local profit, which in turn is sent through underground banking system to other countries. So they need money to finance the initial operation of the smuggling into our country particularly. So they need the money. From where do they get? So there's a demand for money for that. Then the top of the cake is the intelligence agencies of every country, including our country. We are no exception. See, there's a demand from intelligence agencies for secret money for financing covert operations in other countries. This is an absolute necessity. We may say, look, are we so immoral as to go and interfere in some other country to subvert their democratic process or otherwise, and things like that. But probably many of you, I am sure, would have read at least Chanakya and other things, where you cannot be what you call complacent and say that we are good people, we are nice, and probably nobody will hurt and things like that. We have the example of China, when Pandit Nehru was expounding the Panchsheel principles and other things, but we were stabbed in the back because we thought our Himalayan borders were safe. It was not. As de Gaulle said, a country is like a young woman, and each time she has to guard herself for her chastity. So a country is like that. Unless you are absolutely guarded, you can be attacked any time and anywhere, and any part of the country can be vulnerable. So that being so, the best way to keep others from troubling us is trouble them also. So though you may not believe, it is some of our agencies today are being blamed that we are creating problem in Balochistan. There's constant complaint of Pakistan against us. True or otherwise is another question, but it must be true. Because I remember when I was in the government, we were constantly financing, training and sending PPP volunteers from Gujarat. We used to train them, send them across the sea because it's the shortest way to reach Karachi from Koteshwar, and then go there, then throw bombs, this, that and other things. And Karachi was a constant place where bombing used to take place. So we keep them busy there, and they keep us busy. They keep us busy here. So unless we keep them busy there, they will give us more trouble. So they have their own agenda, which we, in spite of the best international pressure, they are not going to give up. So best way is to keep them busy. Otherwise they will bleed us. So equally we should bleed them. But then this is done in national interest. See, we may not agree about the LTTE operation. It was completely financed by India. And the reason at that point of time, what came up in the mind of the government of the day was that slowly Sri Lanka was coming within the, what you call, the influence of the United States. And we were not trusting United States at that point of time because we felt that once Sri Lanka comes under the influence or the hegemony of the United States, then it will be a launching pad to subvert India at any time and other things. Even otherwise they can always do. They have that type of military might, they have that type of intelligence might and other things. And coming so close as Sri Lanka, they could have hurt us anytime. So to counter that, and even otherwise it was a legitimate aspirations of the Tamil people that they wanted independence for that area and other things. A lot of negotiations were done and to get them at least autonomy. But unfortunately, the Sri Lankan government was very short-sighted. They were not even giving regional autonomy, or at least within the constitution to a great extent. But Prabhakaran also was very stubborn fellow. And like all terrorist organizations, there are always two types of, it's like a spectrum. You have the extremists and also the very nice people who would like to work within the constitution and other things. So we had very good people also within the Tamil freedom movement there, like Dharmalingam and so many others. Prabhakaran started eliminating one after them and killing them. Ultimately, he thought he can be the sort of a dictator in that area and other things. So a stage came when he became almost uncontrollable even by the government of India. And he was not, I remember he coming to Delhi with all his armed guards and other things who were better armed than any of our police people. All those arms were provided by us. I remember one container supplied by Noble Industries came from Singapore, landed at Madras Custom House, and our customs officer seized it. Then immediately instructions were given to us that we should hand it over to the ex-branch of the Tamil Nadu government. Ex-branch of the Tamil Nadu government is the DMK government, who were hand in glove with the LTTE. So quietly it went off to LTTE again. When a stage came when he became sort of too difficult to control, and that was the time, and the Sri Lankans also relented, and they said, look, we will cooperate with the government of India, though they have not kept their promises. And that was the time when we sent the Indian peacekeeping force and other things, and then we had to sort of decimate them, but still they survived because international funds were flowing into Sri Lanka to help the... Only mistake Prabhakaran did was, he was good at guerrilla war, he was not good at the regular war. The moment regular wars were started against the LTT, they were nowhere. Because his guerrillas were not trained to fight a regular army. So he was all right to fight, to come, attack and retreat. That's how the guerrilla operations are done. But in a military operation, you have to face the enemy face to face and fight. So that was the thing that happened. So intelligence agencies are one of the big agencies where they demand. For example, when the Russians were under control of Afghanistan, I have written in my book about this, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International was the medium through which the financing of the Taliban took place, and Taliban were again financed by the Americans. Initially some amount of seed money was given, which was routed through the Pakistani army. Only 20-30% with the Taliban, the rest of the money Pakistan army would swallow, or the Pakistan government. So even with that, they were able to make the life of the Russians miserable, and Russians realized that their soldiers will become drug addicts. They were also losing life, like the Americans became drug addicts in Vietnam when they sent their soldiers and other things. So that's how the Americans helped. And later the Americans said, you have the drugs, you sell them, generate the money, and then you fight. So Americans officially fight drug trafficking, and unless the President of the United States gives a certificate that this particular country, A or B or whatever it is fighting drug trafficking and preventing any drug smuggling taking place to the United States, no American aid comes to that particular country. Here they knew. The CIA was telling the Taliban, you sell the drugs, generate the money, and we'll supply arms against payment. So that was what is happening there. So again, the Taliban, like Prabhakaran or this chap, Bhindranwala, he became a Frankenstein. And ultimately, the Taliban is giving the latest trouble to the United States. And now the US soldiers are dying there. It is their creation. Taliban was entirely a creation of the United States. Then during international trade, when the imports and other things take place, there is a certain amount of under-invoicing if the import tariffs are very high. And till recently, we had a very bad customs regime where the rate of taxation was almost 80% plus equivalent amount of countervailing duty equal to the excise duty payable in India and other things. It used to come to almost 180, 190%. Now, if I start a project, do I pay 190% of tax or use 100% for setting up my project and other? It became impossible. So at that point of time, in international trade, most of the imports were being under-invoiced, and the differential amount has to be paid. So from where do they get the funds? The businessmen were compelled to sort of acquire funds through illegal channels, finance the imports, under-invoice it, and if caught, then go through the legal process of getting punishments, prosecution and other things. Similarly, the over-invoicing takes place of exports, and the extra money that is generated is again sent through Hawala and other things, and enjoy tax concessions and Section 80 HSC of the Income Tax Act and other things. Then for paying commissions to decision makers when the armed forces requirements or tenders are called and other things. And that's where huge amount of money is involved and other things. Every country, whenever an arms are purchased and other things by the decision makers, including the highest in decision makers, and also probably the army generals and other things who probably give recommendatory decisions, there's a certain amount of commission being paid, and one good thing is higher the contract, lower the commission. Instead of 1%, it becomes 0.5%, 0.5% becomes 1%. I remember distinctly, I was posted in Kuwait for undercover operations to cover West Asia and North Africa. A military delegation came there for selling arms from India. And we are as good as Czechoslovakia in small arms and even medium arms and other things. So we used to export to so many other countries. So I arranged some meetings with the Defense Ministry there, and there a secretary of the Defense Ministry is called undersecretaries, like the United States, the type of designations there. So I arranged the meetings, and in the meeting he was very frank. Across the table he's telling us, you do one thing, if it's $100, they sort of invoice it on $110. What is your problem? This 10% you credit it to my London account, I'll give you the account number. So openly he's telling us across the table. General Alfred was surprised. I was surprised, because all the time I was fighting crime here and I'm promoting corruption there. So I had a lot of conflict in my job responsibility. In fact, I used to fight with my ambassador regularly on this particular point. There, for promotion of trade, anything is done. Whereas here, for even the smallest, if a man claims false DA, we suspend him immediately, charge sheet him and other things. So they sort of a conflict in moral values. So that used to take place. Then we came back. I told the ambassador this is what happened in the meeting. He said only up to 4% or 3% is permitted, and so we will send a cipher telegram to the Minister for Defense Production at that time was Vijay Charan Shukla. Sorry, I'll be mentioning a lot of names and other things irrespective of the political ideologies. I don't belong to any political ideology, and I'm a staunch nationalist. I believe and I love my country. So please don't mistake me if I also mention names of other political parties. It's purely for illustration and to make the the lecture interesting. So promptly we receive a reply saying that as a special case, we will relax and make the payment. So then I asked the ambassador, how is the payment made? Then he told me it's very simple. He said, for that the first time I am coming to know the government process, how bribes are paid internationally from government to individuals or government to governments and things like that. So he told me that there is a secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs called Secretary Economic. He is empowered to exactly inform the Reserve Bank of India how much money has to be credited to the account of the foreign person. And that was the first time I came to know that a slush fund is maintained by the Reserve Bank of India, which is at the sort of for which a secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs can authorize the payment and other things. So why it is done? It's done in national interest. So when an intelligence agency does, it's in national interest. When corruption is paid for getting a job done, it's a crime. So you can see different standards for different things. Then other demand for the last one is very interesting, is where husbands trying to conceal funds from their wives. It doesn't apply to India because we are so poor that we accept whatever one house or whatever we have, we give to our family. And generally, as most of us good husbands, we always purchase the house in the name of the wife. The reason being, income tax law also permits that. One house you can write in the name of your wife without any gift tax and other things. And not only that, probably it's a good security for the family, so we do that. But there, they have so much of money, so there they go on changing wives also. And the wives try, when the divorce takes place, there's a hell of a lot of discussion that takes place, where how much of money should be extracted from the former husband. So what they try to do is, they open a Swiss bank account, and there they keep the money so that the wife who is separating from him, she doesn't know how much wealth he has and other things. So that is one thing. Similarly, parents concealing from children. Again, the same situation. It will not apply to our country, but now in our country also it is happening, where the present generation children are throwing their old parents out of the house. And or the estate of deceased persons, where they have no children or there are no surviving children. So there also the difficulty comes in. So these are some of the examples which I thought I should bring to your notice. Now, the flip side of it, from where does the supply of secret money comes? Most of these things are complementary. So the same, for example, drug trafficking creates enormous amount of money, as I said. The estimated money that is generated in drug trafficking is of the order of about $500 billion. Then organized crime, again, a huge amount is generated, and organized crime is a sort of a generic word which combines loan sharking operations, prostitution, not prostitution of what happens in our country. In the West, for example, right now the latest thing that's happening in the West is to smuggle East European women to USA or other countries which are prosperous and other things. I saw a number of them working as domestic maids in UK. So they are lured as if they would be given a jobs and other things. Ultimately, they go into prostitution. Then the gambling is another big source. Like this, they have various types of operations under organized crime. Then in organized crime, what are the type of people who sort of, what is their face like and other things? What is their attributes? So here, it's a continued business activity, continuous criminal activity. The reason is, normally if a person gets angry suddenly, emotionally, something happens, he sees his wife being in love with a paramour or something like that. When he sees suddenly, he may immediately kill him. Similarly, I found in Andhra Pradesh, where irrigation is a very sensitive thing. When water is flowing in one field, if some chap, the neighboring farmer, if he cuts it and diverts into his field, immediately this chap will take one sickle and immediately cut his neck. It is emotional, single criminal activity which has nothing to do with the organized crime or organized criminal activity and other. Organized criminal activity is a continuous activity where continued crime takes place and other things. That is one of the attributes. The second is using ordinary techniques of business to maximize profits. So they treat organized crime or, for example, gambling. They want enormous profits in gambling. For that, they do any subversion and things like that. Then greed. They are not satisfied even if they enter business, which they do. They, whatever funds they are generated, they try to take over legitimate business enterprise and then try to bring about various types of criminal activities they take place and other things. So here, they are not satisfied with normal profits. Greed is one of their attributes. They want enormous amount of profit, 50%, 100%, they don't mind. So that is another characteristic they have. And the next is the need to corrupt. Because corruption they use it as to facilitate their continuing criminal activity or to see that a person who is in responsibility, he could be a politician, he could be a judge, he could be an administrator, or he could be a law enforcement officer. They want to ensure that the fellow doesn't trouble them. So give them money, keep them happy. So that is another thing. So to corrupt is one of their attributes. Then they also operate in a criminal milieu, a criminal atmosphere. Their method is you take money and be happy or face a bullet. These are the only two options they give. Then while recruiting people to organized crime, other thing they do is the structure. They're extremely cautious when they recruit people and other things, so that they become slowly at the lower level, then they have to rise. They have to gain the confidence and other things. So for that purpose, either they take people from an extended family, or if possible from family members or an extended family, and they're screened so much to ensure that the chap has real loyalty to the organization and not to anybody else. So strict enforcement of hierarchy, loyalty, and that to undivided loyalty is one of the things they expect when they recruit. And the structure is pyramidal. There's a top person who is not known even to the third level. Maybe the second level will know. Third level may not know who is the real person at the top and other things. And the field level operations are completely taken away from the top hierarchy. Whereas top hierarchy may be sitting in a boardroom of a company and other things, whereas the low level operators will be operating in the field. They're treated as expendable. If some fellow is caught, is finished, let him go to jail, but his family may be compensated. Or if he is killed, let him be killed. The other fellow will replace him. Or other things I found is in particularly the foreign exchange rackets I found. The moment a person is caught, though we may arrest him and put him in jail and other things, the moment he is released, immediately he is transferred within the country to Calcutta or Bombay, or outside the country to Hong Kong or Singapore. And now they have organizations, headquarters at different places in different countries and things. So that he is not available for the next hearing or the prosecution and other things. So they operate in different jurisdictions. They diversify business so that from the profits generated in crime is invested in less risk activities, particularly in business and other things. And the only way to sort of tackle this type of people is if they are caught, then best thing is to forfeit their proceeds of crime, and that's how they can come under control. Now the other main source from which the supply comes is corruption. And the corruption, we know what levels it has reached and other things. Recently we see the situation of Anna Hazare and others. And so now people are sick with the extent of corruption that is taking place, not only at the highest level, but even at the lowest level. The common man is the most affected person. In fact, I was discussing while coming here with Mr. Gopinath, I personally have differences in the methodology that Mr. Hazare is adopting. His activity is very good. He has created tremendous amount of awareness amongst the youth particularly, and even amongst the people at large. And it's a good thing that people are now conscious that somehow we should control corruption, and for that whatever measures have to be taken. But can we control by just appointing one Lokpal and other things? And is it necessary that the entire organization should be should be under the supervision of the Lokpal and other things? Lokpal is necessary. Lokpal is necessary to sort of supervise the corruption at the highest level, from the Prime Minister probably up to the Member of Parliaments. Lokayukta should be at the state level, where from the Chief Minister down up to that. And then we have the Central Vigilance Commission, who will operate at the bureaucrats level and other things. Then we have anti-corruption agencies at the state level and the central level. They will do with other organizations. Each will be independent, but let them function under the supervision of the Lokpal. So that, like the High Court functions as a what you call a supervisory authority to supervise how the district judges are functioning or the lower subordinate judges are functioning. Supervisory jurisdiction should be there, but you cannot have everybody functioning under a Lokpal. There may be 10 or 11 Lokpals, but you need a huge organization, and who will supervise? It will become like another behemoth, like a government organization ultimately becoming non-functioning. So that is so. I don't know. His movement is good. His what you call his objects are very good. But I think I'm doubtful whether the advice that he is getting is right or wrong. I'm not so sure. Then tax evaders, which is again a common form where the evaded tax is sent away to a tax haven and other things. Then fraud. A lot of frauds take place in the country, both in business, in trade, and particularly international trade and other things. We were talking about the dictators and tyrants and political leaders who touch. For example, I will give one example of one of the dictators. Juan Perón was president of Argentina at one point of time. He is no more. His wife is also no more. His wife, Eva Perón, was known as the friend of the shirtless one. She was supposed to be a friend of the lowest of the laborers in Argentina. And then there was a revolution and both of them were thrown out of the country. They came to the Spanish Riviera and they had a place there. They stayed there. And all the money they made through corruption and cheating the government and other things, they kept it in Swiss banks. Eva Perón suddenly died of cancer. And then President Perón went to the Swiss banks and said, please transfer my wife's money into my account. He said, no, she has not left any instructions, gone. The whole money went off. And I had a personal experience where at a very junior officer with only 4 years of service, I was posted in charge of Delhi airport, which was very small at that time. And we had instructions from the DRI, the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, that one particular Swiss banker who was coming, he should be kept under surveillance. So that chap came, and then we examined his baggage, nothing suspicious was there. And when he was leaving, then I posted one officer in Mufti, and he followed. Straight he went to Mr. Jagjeevan Ram's house and settled down. And we reported promptly, and the matter ended there. After 2-3 days, he was leaving, and we wanted to check his baggage, and Mr. Jagjeevan Ram himself comes along with him, sees him off, and then we couldn't do anything. A cabinet minister coming and escorting a Swiss banker, what could an officer with 4 years service do at that point of time? So this is the type of situations which bureaucrats face in real life situations. And subsequently another event happened, I can mention. He was involved in, when he was defense ministry, he was involved in, with one Gokal brothers. They used to talk amongst themselves in Afrikaans. And they established their office in Kasturi buildings in Bombay. And they were operating to get defense contracts and other things. And these people presented a Jaguar car to the son of Mr. Jagjeevan Ram. We located that, we took photographs, we got the license. Then he and the government at that point of time were not pulling on well. So he came to Madras. At that time, I was in Madras doing some anti-corruption work against the Karunanidhi and his ministers. And we were conducting raids, unearthing a lot of money and other things. And then we had specific information. He came by an Air Force aircraft. We had specific information that while going, he is carrying a trunk load of currency. Now, we couldn't do it. The aircraft is in the technical area where the VIP aircraft stands. We normally don't go there except giving paper clearance and other things. Nobody is allowed to go there because the Air Force is guarding that area. And then this trunk went and other things, except informing Delhi, we couldn't do anything beyond that. So that's how the operations take place when things come. Then terrorism. Terrorism initially starts with some ideology. There's either a ethnic group or some other groups. They have some grievance. You cannot say they have no grievance. They have some grievance. Their area is not developed. They are not given full autonomy. And everyone wants to become a minister because then he feels he is a minister. And this type of situations are there. In Northeast, I have seen this at very close quarters. And after the 7 states were formed and things, I went there to see the Indo-Burma border and how sort of porous it was of various activities that was taking place through insurgency and other things. At that time, I used to meet these people, a young man of 24, 22 years, 20 years, I am minister, so and so, he would come and shake hands. When you look at him, he doesn't look like a minister also. So that's how they all want to become ministers. The whole idea is to make money, nothing beyond that. And also probably to have power. So the idea is initially with some amount of ideology, they want their part of the country to be developed. They want to enjoy some status and other things. That is good. Same thing was started in Punjab and in the Northeast. Now, I found in Punjab particularly, initially they used to do small thefts, catch hold of, go and raid some bank, steal and other things. Later on, they started developing dossiers on important people who had lots of money. Go and meet them and say, look, this is your list of assets, which he may not know himself. And we know this. Now, how much percentage you will give in this, or you will be bumped off. So they do that. Then when enormous amounts of money accumulate, then they put it in big investments. And then the profit starts coming. I found in Punjab particularly, the Punjab terrorists investing in huge properties in malls and other things there, and in business establishments. So the funds started generating. A very serious and important scientific study was done of the North Ireland tribals. I think Jerry Adams or something is his name, if I remember correct. Now, this study indicated, it was done by one of the English universities, and we found that enormous amount of funds were generated by the Irish, North Ireland terrorists, and ultimately he came to peace with the UK government, basically because he wanted to enjoy all this property. He created so many companies, so much of investment and other things. And then at some point he wanted to enjoy this, otherwise what is the point? Same thing happened with the Arafat Senior, who first started the Palestinian movement. And everywhere they used to sort of go and bomb the aircraft or do some damage and other things. So every Arab country used to pay them a sort of a protection fee, and enormous amount was being collected. And so he thought the best thing is to go to UK, stay there, and then his funds were kept in one of the banks. He would periodically go draw there and enjoy himself. So a stage comes when all this ideology is forgotten, then the money is used only for their own welfare and nothing beyond that. So terrorism actually starts with an ideology, but ultimately it becomes a business. Then slush funds maintained by transnational corporations, particularly for payment to political parties, politicians, and for paying bribes for securing contracts. I know from personal experience, Dhirubhai Ambani has not only, it's like hedging which horse will win. What a good person who has knowledge of racehorsing, I don't have unfortunately, he bets on 1 or 2 possible horses which are likely to be number 1 or number 2, but he will also, based upon some experience, bet on other horses. So even if one gets defeated, at least he doesn't lose the money, he collects like that. So Dhirubhai Ambani once were telling me that he also paid not only to party X but also to party Y. I said, why? If you are loyal to one party, he said, I don't have any personal friends, permanent friends and permanent enemies. He says, I want people who will help me in business. So that was his approach. And I know in Madras, some of the businessmen who are very close friends of mine, almost from a very young days, and those people paying both for the DMK and ADMK. I said, how is it? He said, no, Amma comes, I'll be in trouble. So he was paying here and there also. So this is another thing which businessmen do. So for this purpose, you have to maintain funds and things like that. Now, I'll just give briefly the estimate of black money that is kept outside India and within the country. Now, in my book also I quoted this Swiss Bank Association, it's an official publication of the Swiss banks. In 2006, they gave details of the bank deposits maintained by various nationalities, including India, and India was the highest. Of 5 countries it's mentioned, India holds in Swiss banks $1,456 billion. This is the official estimate given by Switzerland itself. Russia has $470 billion. United Kingdom has $390 billion. Ukraine $100 billion. China 96, and the total comes to $2,512 billion. Similarly, another study was recently conducted, which was released on November 17th of 2010 by the Global Financial Integrity. It's a think tank in the United States, and the author of the report is an Indian, one Dr. Kar, must be a Bengali. Kar is a Bengali surname, and they published a report called "The Drivers and Dynamics of Illicit Financial Flows from India from 1948 to 2008." And in this, they estimate that the illicit assets removed from India is of the order of 462 billion. There is some amount of variation between this figure and the Swiss bank figure. This is an independent study. And they also say from 1948 through 2000, India lost something like 213 billion in illicit financial flows related to capital flight, that is, which is taken away as part of the capital from the country, and tax evasion, corruption, bribery, kickbacks, and criminal activities. This was the. Now, within India, various studies were conducted, at least by three well-known economists. One was Professor Dr. Raja Chalayas of the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. His was a pioneering study, but unfortunately, it was not a comprehensive study. He thought black money is generated only in tax evasion and nothing beyond that. I mean, that was a very narrow approach, and I used to have strong differences with him in public debates. And I used to tell him, look, we are only thinking that black money comes only from tax evasion. It comes from various sources, at least from 20 different sources. So his study was, but it was a pioneering study because he was one of the first persons who have done this study with a team of economists. And he estimated in 1985 that for the year 1983-84, the amount of black money in the country was varying from 31,584 crores to 36,786 crores, or 18 to 20% of the gross domestic product. And in 1985, he made a projection that it will be about 40,500 crores. The next study was done in 1987 by Dr. Suraj B. Gupta. I think he was probably, I worked under him when I immediately passed out of my university in MA, and I was working in Delhi School of Economics at that time. And he estimated in 1987-88 the black money was 1,49,297 crores. You can round it to 1,50,000 crores. And he says this is 50.71% of the gross domestic product. Now, he made it a little more comprehensive, but not fully comprehensive. He took into account evasion of income tax, corporate tax, excise and customs duties, then smuggling and state taxes. These are the areas which you took. Both these studies did not take into account the money that is generated in either organized crime or in drug trafficking or terrorism and various other forms of serious crime. The next study was a little more scientific and things by Dr. Arun Kumar, who is still alive. Recently, there was a seminar in Delhi which was conducted at the India Habitat Center. I think Mr. Karthikeyan, who belongs to the Karnataka cadre, who was DIG CID, later on became Director CBI and others, who investigated Rajiv Gandhi's murder case, he conducted this seminar in Delhi. And Arun Kumar estimated, and he published a book called The Black Money in India. He said in 95-96 it was as high as 4,50,000 crores is the extent of black money in the country, and 40% of the GDP was in this. And he also said 32% of this money comes from legal sector. That means where it is accounted for, but somehow the money gets into the evaded part, and 8% comes from illegal activities like smuggling, drugs, and flight of capital. This is what he has estimated. Then how this money converted into sort of white money, and how it again comes back to the country and other things. That's what I try to finish it fairly fast so that we have some interaction. Here in India, we call it either black money or white money. We do not give any other shade to that. But in the US, they call it as a grey money, or they call it as dirty money. Now, to convert grey money according to them is only money which is evaded in taxes. Dirty money is money generated in serious crime. This is a sort of a distinction they make. And then what they do is, this money has to be converted into white money, for which you have to launder the money. Let's just like a dirty shirt or dirty linen, we have to wash so it becomes clean. So for this purpose, you have to put through a series of refining process. So the black money is washed and washed and washed, and ultimately it becomes white money, and then it becomes acceptable to the society. Now, how the money laundering takes place is, at 3 stages they do that. First is the placement, that is physical disposal of cash. I must get rid of the cash first. Because it's with me in my house, buried in the backyard, the income tax or somebody will come, dig it out and take it out, and we'll be caught. So you have to first get rid of the money from your legal known places where you reside or you have conduct your business and things like that. So for this purpose, one has to get rid of. So what they do is, the money which are in small denominations are converted into higher denomination, so that the volume gets reduced. So 10 rupee notes are made into 100 rupee notes, 100 rupee notes are made into 1000 rupee notes and things like that. So then after that, how much you can conceal in your beds or in the backyard or in trunks and things like that. So because all that will be found sooner or later. And we had a very interesting experience. We planted one informer as a cook in one of the houses of Gordhan Das Ruparel, who was president of the Indian Sugar Mills Association and who is a well-known businessman in Bombay. In fact, there is a college after his name, Ruparel College. Now this gentleman, this cook, came and told us, he is our informer actually working there. Then he told us, if you enter his drawing room, there will be a carpet. Under the carpet, there will be matching wooden tiles which matches with the flooring. You remove that, there will be one iron door which is locked. So you open the iron door, then there will be steps down, goes to the basement. If you go to the basement, under the puja room there is one room, and under the bedrooms there are 2 side rooms. So you go to the puja room, then there will be one embedded safe down and 2 embedded safes to the wall. Such pakka accurate information he gave. We raided, opened it, found gold concealed in this and silver in the wall safes, and gold kept in this and other things. So we had to prove, he took the stand that this is probably my ancestors must have kept. So we have to disprove that, because that comes under the Treasure Trove Act, which goes to the state government. Even that he will not be able to get it. So there what we did, we took out the municipal records of Bombay Municipal Corporation to show as to when this basement construction was approved. So that proved that when actually he built it and when it came. Because we were prosecuting him under the Defence of India regulations, which are very, very strict. Under the Gold Control Act was under the Defence of India regulations. So he had no choice. So that's how we did. The same informer, we make him disappear, otherwise he would have been killed. We planted him in Rajasthan. In Rajasthan, he entered the house of one businessman, you may recall, I think Devi Dayals, who were in very big business in utensils, aluminum and other things. So in their house, he went, and then he told the same story. In their foundation, there's gold there. So there, since we tried him, once his information was correct, the same thing we thought it will be correct, then his house was searched and everything. There we had to go below the foundation, unfortunately. When we went below the foundation, the gold was there. But then, it would not come under the Defence of India regulations because it was below the foundation. After all, when we dig the house, we will go up to the foundation. What is below the foundation, nobody would know. So it came under the Treasure Trove Act, we handed over to the state government. But the man was deprived of his gold. So one can conceal the amount of black money either in any of these places, so it is not physically feasible to do that. So one has to get rid of it. So earlier method was to put them in currency chests and other things, send him out of the country and things like that, or put them in cars, in false bottoms of the car and other things, or in the dicky and other things, go from one place to other. But any of these type of physical movement would attract attention of the law enforcement agencies, particularly when you are watching a suspect, as it has happened recently. 5 crores cash was seized in the iron ore truck. To whom it belongs is another thing. But the moment it is moving physically, then immediately it raises suspicion. And not only that, we do not know how much of loyalty is there to the person who is actually transporting the cash and all. So the easiest method they found is, for this purpose, the underground Hawala operation started, the underground banking system and others. It actually started with a necessity when India got independence, and so also other countries like Burma, Malaysia, then Sri Lanka, then in Eastern Africa, many of the Indians, we had a lot of amount of money there in the form of properties, in the form of estates, and businessmen and other. Almost everybody was about to lose. Then even in Pakistan, when our population migrated to India, they lost money. But some people who could afford and who foresaw the type of difficulties that they are going to face, then they found out the best thing is to give to an underground operator who will take the money here and deliver it wherever you want and in whatever form you want. So people from Burma who migrated to India, they were sending through Hawala. So here it will be delivered here at home and without any difficulty. Same thing happened from East Africa. They all went away to London, most of them Gujaratis. So their money was transferred to UK, and from there a lot of them came to Bangalore also. They settled in different parts of the country and other things. Punjab, it happened, a lot of people did that. So they gave away their houses here to, Muslims gave away to Indians, Hindus here, and Hindus in turn gave houses to their Muslim friends in Pakistan. So this type of arrangement came in. In Bangalore, it was a very common thing for even from very good families to do Hawala operations, basically for education. Because we had very stringent foreign exchange regulations, it was very difficult for people to finance their children's studies, particularly for FRCS or higher medical education and other things. What they were giving was, they were giving money to their relations in India here, and another person who is already there, he would give from his savings to other boy who is about to study or he is already studying and he needs money for its maintenance. So this type of underground banking system came where you get rid of the cash here and it's delivered wherever you want and other things through the Hawala operations. And this is what is followed by our politicians of today. And for this, the tax havens come in. So this is the first stage where physically the cash is got rid of by disposal of bulk cash and that. Next is after disposal, then you have to put through different financial transactions, what is called as layering. Unless you put through these transactions, you have to completely erase the audit trail. Unless you erase the audit trail, the person or the source from which the illicit funds are generated will be linked up with the person who committed the crime. It's very easy to trace back a transaction through its audit trail and other things. To obliterate that, you put through different things. So what is done is, these people open a bank account, a shell corporation in Mauritius, or in Switzerland, or any of the tax havens like Cayman Islands or Channel Islands. I saw Dhirubhai doing this. I went for investigation and I found in Channel Islands, they set up a series of one company name I distinctly remember is Crocodile Investment Company. Any name that came, he would give for that company. And then he was a pioneer in one way. He made, because Pranab Babu was the finance minister, and his own liaison man was in Delhi who had close contact and other things. R.K. Navana also was in his pocket. So what he did was, first thing, he said, why are you not allowing Indians abroad to invest money in India? Yes, it's a good idea. He says, because we get foreign exchange without any strings and other things. So what he did was, he requested one of our syndicate bank managers, one Mr. Shetty, his first name I forgot. He made him resign. He made him his liaison officer in London. And then from these Channel Islands, the money will come to London. And in London, a lot of Indian names came and other things. And then he would send it to India. And here it will be invested in Dhirubhai's new companies. Now here, his own money is coming back. His own money, he will treat it as a loan. He will service interest. And he will also repatriate the profits. So the cycle starts again. So that was the technique which he was the pioneer, which others started. So that is the other thing, technique there. Then the other is creating a trust. I seen a number of business houses, they create trusts. Now here, when a trust or investment company is created by them, then there will be various types of investors. Hundreds of investors will be there. Thereby created any number of companies, hundreds of companies, where probably they may not know how many companies are there. That was the type of operations the big houses do, big business, every one of them. There is no exception that Dhirubhai has done it or everyone is doing it. Now the investments they take care is below 5,000 rupees. If it's between 5,000 to 10,000, particularly if it crosses 10,000, they have to inform the income tax department. So 5,000 or 6,000 rupees, if somebody puts a fixed deposit in an investment company created by one of the business houses, then it's very easy, because no income tax officer will spend more than 5,000 rupees to locate whether that particular address is a genuine address or a fake address. As simple as that. So that's how the investment companies get the money, and where the black money comes back, his own black money comes back, and then it becomes a legitimate money in an investment company, which in turn invests in one of the companies that is being promoted. There's other technique. Then fundraising functions. We have been seeing how big malas are put, 1,000 rupee notes and other things. We have seen our Chief Minister of UP being put a mala of 1,000 rupee notes, and so closely it did. You can imagine how it's being done. It was also done by a former Chief Minister of Mr. Chautala's father. He was garlanded on his birthday. There's so much of currency and other things. He was weighed in that. Now, from where? Why will I donate money to a politician? I may donate to a charitable institution. That's a different thing. But not to a politician. And here, it is their own money generated in corruption is done this way. So that money can go either to their personal funds or to this thing. Mayawati has officially announced she has 100 crores worth of property. What was she? She was a school teacher when she started her career. Can anybody from a school teacher, assuming she or he becomes a chief minister, can become a owner of 100 crores property? It's impossible. So that is other technique. I used to see Karunanidhi when I was investigating in the first stage when he came to power, and when we started the investigation, suddenly at the end of the meeting he will announce, today in the meeting an amount of 5,10,215 has been donated. Now who can verify in a meeting attended by 10,000, 1 lakh people to see how much they have donated and other things. So this was another technique that is followed by various politicians. And even the private sector is done. For example, this you would have seen the Diamond District here. It belongs to one of the biggest smuggling syndicates belonging to Kelakarai and Kayalpatnam. KTMS Abdul Khader is also known as Taikavappa. Now, this chap is created one East Coast construction company which has done this Diamond District and other things. Now, this fellow would conduct, he was also in the film field, financing and other things like all smugglers. He would conduct some film functions. And then all the tickets are freely distributed. And then people will come if they want to, otherwise also they will say so much is collected. And then it becomes official. So also you would have seen in 5-star hotels, there are a number of shops. Some of them belong to Kashmiris. I have never seen anybody going there purchasing anything. In any of the shops, I am very sure most of you would have observed, all this so-called mall which is there in a 5-star hotel, nobody will purchase anything there. But he would be writing in the books, so much sold, all in foreign exchange. So from where foreign exchange will come and who will purchase in foreign exchange and pay in foreign exchange? And that type of prices are paying so much of rent and everything. So that's a process of layering that takes place. Then they build casinos, they build hotels, produce cinemas, or set up a business where there's a lot of cash flow. So that this black money gets intermingled, and irrespective of the fact whether the business makes profit or not, it is what you call, they show so much of profit generated. Even after paying tax, it's worth it, because it becomes legitimate. There is this particular group had Omega Cables in Madras, which had a huge office. They did not produce 1 kilometer of a cable. But every year there will be a balance sheet, there will be a profit and other things. So that's how the black money is got rid of and a layering operation takes place. And easiest is to give to a Hawala operator through the Swiss banks or through Mauritius Group. Shell companies are created. They invest in legitimate business in India or take over a legitimate business and then perpetrate the crime and other things. The last is an integration process which takes place where this illegitimate money comes back and then it is invested, and they take over legitimate business, and each time a legitimate business is threatened that it will be taken over and other things. And it happens periodically with even a good company like Larsen & Toubro, which is professionally run. Many of the big business houses tried to take over it. Fortunately, the shareholders resisted that. The government also intervened that this company at least is doing good work and it should not be tampered with, and they did not permit such a hostile takeover and other things. Now, once this money goes outside the country, and ultimately they have to select some places which are known as tax havens, and how these tax havens are created. I will give some countries' names where these were set up. For example, you have Singapore is the latest hub where they are giving better protection than Switzerland. Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, Bahamas, Channel Islands, Cayman Islands, Hong Kong, Bermuda, and so many other institutions. In fact, most of them were created by the Britishers before we got independence, and most of them were utilized for overseas operations. And Macau, they have a pocket. Hong Kong, they had a pocket. And from India, for any of these operations, for anti-China operations in those days, they were using all these footholds. Because officially the parliament is very watchful in UK, like in India, they had a very good democracy. Anything that is done immediately come to the notice. So for this purpose, they created all these islands where there are hardly any foreign exchange laws. So the money would go there. From there, they would use it for their covert or overt operations in different countries and other things. Now, how is it selected and what are their this thing? They have no foreign exchange laws in their country. Generally, their political climate is very strong, and particularly Switzerland, Singapore, they beat other countries and things like that. Then, where the incorporation procedure of a company is very simple. For example, if you want to go to the Bahamas, you have to only need a driving license. That's enough to enter that country. There's no need even to have a passport. As simple as that. And then I'd been to Liechtenstein when I was asked to do the Bofors investigation. Their husband and wife who are advocates, they are in charge of a company. He is the managing director, she is the joint managing director. How much is the investment? $500. Every year the balance sheet will be there, hardly anything is shown. But they control in turn the companies. This Liechtenstein company was known as CIAOU. And this company owned, and this company got a profit out of the Bofors case and other things. Similarly, there was one AE Services Private Limited, which is a British-based company, but having their office in Switzerland. They would not tell us anything. Luckily, this man was one Major Wilson of the Indian Army before independence, and he was posted in Darjeeling. He was very cooperative. He gave the details of how much money he got. And then he told that, look, there was given by the company, because we worked for 15 years to get the contract of Bofors. And it had nothing to do with the money that transpired between the two governments, because it was a government-to-government transaction. So, and I told him and warned him also. I said, look, yours is a British registered company. I'll inform the British government and they'll be subject you to income tax. He said, yes. I told my owners to keep the money safe so that we can pay the income tax of the UK. So, that's how the things operate. Then, but he operates from Switzerland. Being there's hardly any controls and things like that. Then it's close to the transport or communication facilities should be excellent. So they're available for people to go either by air or by sea, so that it's easy and fast to approach and other things. And the availability of professional and business address. For example, Channel Islands, morning a person takes flight, goes there, does his business as a lawyer and fiducial consultant, and then comes back by evening. It's like going from Jayanagar to probably Vidhan Saudha and coming back. As simple as that. So they go in the morning and come back. So professional help is available and things like that. So I would stop at that because I'm just reaching 1 hour or more than that. So I would wait for your questions. Because the subject can go on, and I must stop at this stage.
Now you said about $2,000 billion are kept in Swiss banks.
Yes.
What do they do with that type of money?
Not only that, not only the Indians as individuals have kept there or business houses, even the foreign governments, including the US government and Indian government, we keep money with the Swiss banks. We trust Swiss banks much more for stability of the currencies.
How do they manage that money?
That's what I'm trying to. That's what I'll. So the foreign governments, including Government of India, including the US government, they all keep money with the Swiss banks for safety, which in turn is deployed for financing projects by good multinational corporations. They give it like any other banking operation. If I want to set up an industry, I go to my banker and tell, this is my feasibility report, please give me an advance. So long as you give collateral and give safety and other things, then he will give us a loan, exactly on the same basis. Because when you deposit money in Switzerland, you hardly get 1% or even negative interest. Whereas they charge interest when they give money to the big corporations to undertake a project. The other thing I forgot to tell in the thing is, in the covert operations, including China, in the beginning, they were keeping money in Swiss banks to particularly subvert operations in UK, USA and other countries when both were not in good terms and other things. And they used to use drug trafficking money for that purpose. Because China started, I said, when they subjugated us for centuries by sending opium from India, I said, why we should not do that? So, and then Russia was doing it. Russia does in a very different way. Russia would deploy money to Swiss banks. From there, they would invest in defense industries in USA and control their decision making. For example, they start a project for improving, say, an aero engine. They'll say, you stop this project, it's not viable because we control the shares. So, Swiss banks are used as a medium not only for deploying the funds for purpose of investment and getting back a return, but also various countries use Swiss banks to control the economy of other countries. That is a danger, and that's the danger we'll also face. Suppose there's some countries not listening to their advice and things like that, they'll depress their currency. That's the first thing that is done. UK has suffered many times when they took a tough stand in Parliament that we should not allow this to happen, that to happen. Best thing, they have brought down the British pound. Then they had to immediately say, sorry, we'll behave as we. So that is the power of the Swiss banks, whether we like it or not, but that is what is happening. One of the basic things that happen is people in the middle class and the lower classes suffer. The purchasing power of a person who acquires this black money is enormous. When he goes to a shop, he will not bargain. He will purchase at any price because for him it is peanuts. One person, Sadaji gave me an excellent example. He asked me, do you know how much money a particular political family is having? I said, maybe 100 crores or 200 crores, some estimate. He said, you don't know, you are absolutely this thing, out of your mind. He said, you take a swimming pool, throw a few mugs of water out. Will it affect the swimming pool? He said, that is the type of money each political family is having and things like that. So what happens is, intermingling will help a money launderer to see that the money is made into legitimate money. It becomes very difficult. For example, if you recall the Coimbatore fake currency case, where 2 rupee notes, the pink notes, were counterfeited by a sub-inspector of police. And he was so clever, the quality of the notes were so good. It was, he did not do as well as Telgi. Telgi did a very sensible thing. He took the paper from the mint, he took the old machinery from the mint, he employed the retired officers of the mint and produced absolutely genuine papers. It was not a counterfeit. Because the paper was genuine, the watermark was there, it was all government stationery. He used the government machinery which was discarded. Only thing is they should have destroyed these things. They didn't do. He employed the same people who were retired from the mint for this work. So this chap printed it, but he was so clever, he distributed this counterfeit currency to, for example, which I know personally because I was posted in Davangere at the time, he gave to the owner of the Davangere cotton mill so that salaries were paid from this. Similarly, cinema halls, where the money is collected in cash. So when they have to deposit money at every day. So a part of the money will be good money, a part of money will be this. So that's how intermingling takes place. But who is affected? It affects us, the common man.
How do they estimate this amount of black money? They say
Complicated process. A lot of mathematics is involved. They have to develop various equations because they have to take each area and estimate. For example, take evasion in excise. We have identified the commodities where evasion is maximum. It's known. We identified the commodities. Now we have to estimate in that commodities how much is evasion takes place. For example, in North India, when you ask them how much is your production, he'll immediately say in Hindi, "Kya excess production chahiye ya sacha production chahiye?" So more than 50-60% is evaded. In fact, there is no need for us to increase any taxes. If we collect the taxes what is due to the government, that's enough actually to carry us more and it will wipe out all deficits and things like that. So they have to take each industry, study the evasion-prone industries and then estimate for that particular industry. Similarly, you have to take other taxes. Each tax has to be taken and studied. So in tax evasion you can estimate. Similarly, you have to take other forms of crime. You have to take from what you call corruption, you have to take from what you call terrorism or other various forms of crime, then estimate. Some smuggling, for example, smuggling you can estimate because figures are available. Gold Council of India, World Gold Council periodically publishes how much of gold came to India. They also tell us how much of gold came officially through imports in India and how much came unofficially. So there are figures available, so you have to consolidate all this. It's a massive exercise, it's not a simple exercise. And then some amount of guesswork, guesstimate is also there. So then they estimate as a percentage of the gross domestic product. So that's how it's a complicated process. Yes, sir. That gentleman. You see, we cannot live without hope. So that is one of the basic principles of humanity. See, a person, the moment he gives up hope, he will be dead in the next 1 week, or if not immediately. So man can live only by hope. So here, according to me, one is that tax should be affordable and payable. It's a must. If you recall, when V.P. Singh was the finance minister, he brought down the income tax to 40%. And earlier, you take any of the schemes that were given for the immunity schemes, it was 60-40. So when it is 40, I knew many of the businessmen telling me, why should we evade now? It is 40%, why? There is no need for us to go for the clemency or these schemes, any of these schemes, voluntary disclosure schemes and things like that. So it should be at, for even 40 is very high. Why should I work hard and why should I pay? In fact, in one of the raids, I was talking to the AVM people, Sarvanan or whatever is the name, the young man. And now he was the producer of some of the good movies. So he was telling, and when our income tax level was 99% almost, and in fact, if you add all other taxes, you are going beyond 100. In other words, you have to do dissaving for paying the tax. So he said, after 2 movies or something, I work for the President of India. Why should I work? Then other thing I found, he was having all the prize-winning tickets of the lottery. All lotteries. Then I said, why you are doing? Sir, we have to pay money to get this lottery ticket because this is free from what they call as windfall tax. Now windfall tax also you have to pay 40% now. So that charm has gone, purchasing lottery tickets or horse winning tickets and other things. So human ingenuity is so much. So we have to probably think like what a common man thinks. I said, look, why we make his life miserable? We should probably keep the taxation level. I saw in Singapore, whether you like it or not, he makes the bill and gives you. He keeps it there. I mean, you may not take it or you may put it in the bag and throw it out. But I never seen any businessman not giving a bill for you, whatever you purchase and things like that. So that's, and at the airport, if you give these bills, immediately your tax refund comes to the house. I mean, system should be like that. So where it is affordable, compliance should be easy, and here we make it complicated. When Mr. Chidambaram was finance minister, each budget speech I used to see that he will say we are rationalizing and simplifying the tax structure, and we found it was more complicated each time. It used to take 6 months to understand the new regime. So that is not this thing. Only good thing is when Dr. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister, one thing he did was, any item of tariff will pay the same tax. Disputes came down by almost 70-80%. Same thing Yashwant Sinha did. Whatever little was left, that also he rationalized. Any tax item, any item that has been taxed either for customs or excise, he said absolutely same rate of duty. Finished. The disputes came down. So that's how the tax system should be. See, it should be simple, it should be easy for compliance, and nobody should even bother. Look, why I should not? Yeah, I should be. See, that should be, and it should not be something beyond me to make me do something which is not correct. So that's the problem. Now, for example, why do you need a khata for your own house after you purchased through a sale deed? What is the khata is actually a system of mutation in the municipal records so that the tax is you are paying. So a simple letter to the municipal corporation saying that, look, I have purchased such and such a house or flat. This is a copy of the sale deed. Please convert, change in the municipal records from the previous name to my name. And he should reply saying, yes, it has been mutated in the municipal record. Why you need a khata and go 10,000 rupees bribe, otherwise that fellow refuses to give you a khata. I can't understand this. And when you want to pay the house tax, he said the khata is in the old man's name, only on the old man's name I will take the... I purchased, I am paying the tax, he says I will give the receipt in the name of the previous owner. How is it permissible? And where is the need for the kata? See, all these things were created by the bureaucrats so that they can fleece. That's it. So you wanted to ask something. Ramdev, you forget it, but it can be brought to the country. It is not difficult. We have to bring about, as a country, certain amount of pressure on the Swiss government. And what they have agreed is for the double taxation avoidance agreement. That's not enough. Under the double taxation agreement, they disclose to us who are the people and how much money they have kept. Vice versa, their nationals who are earning in our country, we report, because number of Swiss companies operate in India and other things. So, but that is not good enough to compel the Swiss government to bring the money into our country. The other thing is, there is what is known as double criminality. If we think tax evasion is a crime in our country, it should also be a crime in Switzerland. In such cases, they part with the information as well as we can freeze the money also. But it's not a crime. Tax evasion is not a crime in their country. Foreign exchange violation is not a crime in their country. But money laundering is a crime because the organization, OECD countries, the developed countries, they have brought pressure on under the Financial Action Task Force, compelling Switzerland that you have to disclose if there's money generated in serious crime, in drug trafficking, in money laundering operations. So, or terrorism. So, Swiss government is now relenting and giving information, provided you prove that this is the area from which it has happened. Now, other areas, for example, tax evasion, they are not still giving. So, we have to compel the Swiss government. I said, if you don't do this, then probably we will not allow your government to do business in India, or we will not purchase any Swiss goods and all. Then they will come. So, some amount of pressure has to be used. After all, we are not a small country. We are as big, second biggest in Asia compared to China. And we should bring pressure. That is the way it should be done.
What has happened so far?
100% success, 100% success in DRI. But I would not say that with other agencies, because here our activities are entirely based on intelligence, and excellent intelligence based upon wiretapping, surveillance, physical surveillance, and a careful study of the criminal organization over a period of time. It's not just attack like that. A careful study, building up entire operational structure, his place of operations, his contacts, his storage place, his place where the accounts are kept, and then finally a raid is done. It's not just you get some information, go and raid. That will be a futile exercise. You try to understand the whole organizational structure of, for example, a Hawala syndicate, a smuggling syndicate, and things like that, it is done. And so the success rate is done. Regarding sharing of intelligence, there is a coordination committee which meets every month, either in the income tax department or customs or excise, and they share the intelligence which is above a particular level. That means the value involved is 10 lakhs or 20 lakhs and above, then the information is shared. And when I was in charge, I would share the intelligence with the IB or vice versa, IB with us. But it depends upon the person-to-person rapport that is maintained, because each intelligence agency wants to hold the information to their chest. Because they are afraid. No, they are afraid that it will be spoiled or sabotaged by somebody. That lack of confidence is there because we have black sheep in our own organizations. So that is the basic reason why many of the operations fail. We have a lot of black sheep in our organizations, and one has to be very careful in selecting. For example, when we used to take to the DRI, we used to pick and choose. IB takes like that, but they had a permanent cadre for which they had a lot of problems. And ultimately, a law was passed in Parliament to get rid of those people who belong to the permanent cadre of the IB. So they got rid of them and brought control and other things. So these are some of the practical difficulties, but there is a great amount of coordination. Sir.
Gentlemen, I am sure you will all agree that this today's talk on the subject of insight into the world of financial secrecy and tax havens by Sri V. Kumar was excellent and highly educative. He has explained how politicians, businessmen, and mafia dons adopt various tricks to clandestinely hide their unaccounted black money. And Sri B. Kumar has excellently brought out. It's all possible because of his years of experience and extensive research and analysis that he had gone through. On behalf of all of you and GIPA, I thank him very much, sir, for the excellent lecture that he has given today.